This is my second of 3 videos covering some of my favorite 2-player games at 3 different weight classes. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is top 10 medium weight 2-player slash couples games. Sort of. I don't know the exact title. I frequently say that because I don't know the exact title. This is me going over a bunch of more medium weight games that are 2 players or best with 2 players or really function well at 2 players, and just going over my 10 or technically 12 games. Now, the last video I did in the series was called Top 10 2-player couples games, or for lighter, gateway, adjacent, whatever it is. This one's going to start drifting a bit more towards 2-player focus in general. Inherently, any couples list can also be rephrased as a 2-player list, and vice versa, I think, unless you're referring specifically to a whole bunch of love-focused games, which is not what I tend to do on this channel, so not that. But in any case, let's go ahead and dive into this. We'll go through all of this, and this is, for me, when I say weight classes is one of those things, probably should have explained this off the bat. If you don't know what game weight is, it's generally a way of categorizing a game as far as how difficult it is to comprehend, process, and engage with. It's a rating you can find over on Board Game Geek, and generally lighter games have a lighter weight. Heavier games have a heavier weight, which makes sense because, you know, weight and light and heavy and all those things and those terminologies. But in any case, let's go ahead and start this off, starting off with the first one. There's 12 on this list. I have one honorable mention and one that should be significantly higher on the list, but I'm putting it off the list just so we can have 12 games, which is Dominion. Dominion, which I have in this giant big box over here. This is actually my not yet full one. I have another full one over there off to the side, which has all my Dominion cards, my Dominion collection, where I have way too much Dominion and still don't have it all, and probably should upgrade to the second edition at some point because I adore Dominion. I find Dominion to be an excellent game, one that I really enjoy, that gives you deck building, and one of the older forms of deck building we've seen, one of the ones that have brought the genre into popularity along with games like Ascension. Star Realms has become one of the big ones over the past few years, and Dominion is one of the granddaddies of the genre and works incredibly well. It gives you tons of cards, tons of expansions with tons more cards, different ways to build out your decks as you ultimately are vying for a bunch of prestige points before you, trying to get more prestige points into your deck before the other players get them into their deck by going through the deck building process. The reason this is my number 12 and technically not really on the list at all is because this isn't really inherently a 2-player game. It does work really well at 2 players, but also works really well at 3, decently at 4. In fact, I'd say 3 is probably my preferred player count here, but this is still a solid medium weight 2-player game, and it's a good time to note for the rest of this list, whatever I call medium weight is going by my own personal perception of how it fits into my life. Some of these games you might find on the lighter end of the spectrum, some of these games you might find on the, I don't think any of them you'll find in the heavier. You might find some of these to be on the lighter, and I'm categorizing them as medium just because that's where I'm putting them for myself and my own experience. But Dominion, fantastic game, to the point that I'm thinking about fully upgrading to the second edition of Dominion, completely re-sleeving everything with 5,000 sleeves, because that's what it'll take. It'll take more than 5,000 sleeves to be clear. I'll probably pick like 10,000 sleeves to sleeve everything, but I plan on getting it all because I love Dominion. I continue to play it. It's one of the games that's been in my collection for a long time. It just works really well as a good, accessible deck building experience that can grow with the players as you evolve through it. You can start off with as little as $35, $40 and get the base set, or you can continue to expand outwards and get a ton of content for this game. My number 11 is going to be one that's coming in that, as I was trying to narrow this list down to only 10 games, which is something I always start with, and then I recognize off the bat that it'll never fully happen, but as I was getting down to the list, a lot of things got chopped off. A lot of things got taken off the list, pushed off to the side. A lot of games that function well at 2 players but aren't really 2-player experiences, I took those off as well, with the exception of Dominion, which I absolutely love. But there was one that, when I got down to the final 11, I was like, you know what? It's going to be an honorary mention because I really enjoy Targi. Not enough that this is the top 10, but Targi is such a compelling experience that I frequently find myself coming back to. Targi is a 2-player worker placement game, a 2-player worker placement game that operates in its own little way as far as how the worker placement runs, as far as how you're placing down workers on these side cards in a way that creates patterns on these center cards, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to both get the center cards you want while blocking your opponent at the same time. There's rules against going across from your opponents, which means every placement you go both has what you want and a form of denial. Denial across from you, denial across the center grid, leaving specific patterns of how things will play out, but you're trying to plan within this round for the things you'll get, which frequently means you have to choose between always planning a turn out, which compromises the choices you can make, or trying to plan within the current round, but you may get blocked, thus finding that you didn't actually get everything you wanted. It has a tense back and forth. I still play the expansion. I have the expansion, have not played it, which is a common occurrence in my collection, I realize. But I play a lot of expansions. I just have a lot of expansions I haven't played too. And in the case, I mean, Dominion's case in point, I play a lot of expansions in this alone, but either way, Targi is a phenomenal two-player game that works, a medium-weight two-player game, plays in around 45 minutes or so. I think the box says 60. It depends. It depends how fast or slow you're going. I find I generally get this game done roughly 45 minutes, and it gives me a fast, compelling, enjoyable experience that gives me enough meatiness and challenging to be a little bit mean, a little bit pushing it, versus enough so that not so much that it's over the top. Speaking of which, when going back to the title of this video before we dive into the official top 10, I'm calling this list top 10 couples and or two-player games. But for me, this is focusing more on two players than couples, although that's going specifically to the nature of my relationship with my wife and how we play games. Generally, the types of games we all play together fall more into the lighter category. The last list I did that I'll link to down below, more so we fall into that category, although there are exceptions. Dominion is a game we love, but half the games here we love. Some of the other games, yeah, roughly half the games on this list we love. But I would say that once you're moving into medium weight, it starts mixing and matching not just the kinds of games I would play with my wife. So for me, I'm focusing more on this as two players over couples in the order that I'm ranking them. Although, honestly, that's just semantics anyway and doesn't really matter at all. From there, we'll go to my number 9. My number 9 is going to be Air, Land, and Sea. That's not true. I lied. Number 9 is Land versus Sea. Too many words, too many games. There's Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, there's Air, Land, and Sea, there's Land versus Sea. That's like 3 games with the word Land versus Sea in them. How could I possibly not be confused? Land vs. Sea from Good Games Publishing is one that has risen quickly, although not the only one on this list that has risen quickly from this year, but Land vs. Sea is definitely one that has gone up quickly in the ranks as far as a meaty two-player game that comes across as light but is very much not so. This game has replaced Carcassonne for me as far as giving me a tile-laying experience that is both pretty and accessible to build out a map while being mean and cutthroat in terms of what you're doing. I thoroughly enjoy this game as far as one player is playing the land, one player is playing as a sea, and you're trying to enclose off your own areas. Every tile you place is trying to be mindful of how it'll create connections, how it'll create access points, how well it'll allow you to close off those connections versus your opponent as you try to strive for both small and large connection points as you build. This game does have a 3 and 4 player mode as well. I do consider them to be not as ideal, I would say, meaning they're good. 3-player in particular. I think 4-player I don't like as much. That's a team mode. 3 players I do like. It's very clever in what it does, but I definitely prefer this one at 2 players, and I find it to be a better experience at 2. Once you move to 3, it's very clever, but it does start to feel at times like the 3rd player is dictating who wins the game, which is a less satisfying experience. I still recommend it at 3, but definitely 2 players is my preferred way to play this tile-laying game that is brutal, mean, cutthroat, a recent addition to my collection this past year, and a solid game. From there, we'll go to my number 8 or 9. What was this? This was 10, wasn't this? I call this 9. This is the problem with having 12 games. This is number 10 on the list. From there, we'll go to my number 9, which I'm going to go with Super Fantasy Brawl for my number 9 over here. Super Fantasy Brawl, this is from Mythic Games, and this one is a arena combat game for 2 players. In theory, there's teams and other competitions, but again, primarily a 2-player experience. Super Fantasy Brawl is giving you a whole bunch of miniatures that are in different boxes, so I can shake this around and not really mess anything up over here, but miniatures that are in different boxes off to the side. Again, more expansions incorporated if you want that. And Super Fantasy Brawl is giving you arena combat. You're going to have the arena over here, the arena that you're trying to face off on as you lay out either the nearframe mat or the board that you have, lay out the statues, and then start trying to vie for objectives while taking down your opponents. This one does drift a bit on the lighter side for sure as far as these go, but it's still a bit more than I would casually encourage for just, a random couple without really knowing them what's going on. This is one that does involve some degree of cutthroat, some degree of getting each other's faces, some degree of knowing characters and cards and learning the various characters at play as you try to figure out the best way to build out your own team in Super Fantasy Brawl, your own team that'll be used to crush your opponent, to react to what they're doing, to be reactive and defensive when you need to be, while being aggressive and pushing the lanes when you need to. When you try to go for objectives, whether you try to go for kills. I really enjoy Super Fantasy Brawl. I've enjoyed it since I first got it, and I continue to enjoy it. This one, I broke it out like a week or 2 ago, and it's still just as much fun as ever to dive into these characters and try to figure out how to build out the right arena and clash into each other full on, taking each other out. Although more specifically, the reason I like Super Fantasy Brawl is honestly because objectives I find to be just as compelling a reason to play the game as anything else. This is not just about killing people. Killing people is good. Taken out of context, that sounds bad. Killing people is good, but often objectives will give you more points, which means it's more important to try to figure out what you're doing and how you're doing and what control you have over just taking down your opponent. My number 8 is going to be Radlands. Radlands from Roxley Games is one that I ignored at first because I decided I don't need more 2-player card games. Then I played Radlands. I played Devin's copy. Devin Talks Tabletop brought a copy over, taught us the game, played it, and really enjoyed it. This was actually one of his first trips down here. May have been his first trip when I played Radlands, and I really enjoyed this one. I still need to pick up the deluxe box for this, but Radlands is ridiculously good. Ridiculously good as far as what it's doing. It's giving you a two-player competitive game in which you have your deck of cards and not that many cards in this box. And it's supposed to be self-contained. No expansions ever, they say. I wonder if that will change. The nature of trying to make money means often things that are popular will get expansions added to them that you didn't need. You know what they'll probably do? They'll probably make a standalone Radlands 2, because if they wanted to go with no expansions ever, which they told people, but they also probably want to make more money on games that are popular, which that's just how companies work, they'll probably go with Radlands 2 and say you could mix and match it, but you also don't need to and don't recommend it. That way they have a loophole. They're probably doing that. I actually believe they're doing that now. This is no insider information. I'm just thinking the way what I would do in their situation. Anyways, Radlands. Radlands is really good. You have a large variety in the bases you utilize, bases that dictate your entire flow of the game, and then past that you have a fairly standard card deck that is not that large. You can learn the cards across several games and get a feel for what types of cards or engines, what type of moves or plays are at play, while you try to figure out when to completely trash a card for temporary effects, when to use them for more permanent ongoing effects, when to try to be defensive, offensive, use your bases, when to use the event row. It's a very, very good game that has continuously grown on me the more I've played it, and I'm continuously playing it. This is one of the other newer additions to this list, although not the last one either. From there we have my number, I have to count here. We have 5 games on the table, which means we're up to my number 7, I think. We have 11, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. We're up to number 7 over here. My number 7 is going to be Welcome to the Moon. Welcome to the Moon, which is, again, another new addition over here. Welcome to the Moon is one that I have not yet reviewed on the channel, although maybe I have, depending on when you watch this, because I just filmed a review for this, so you may or may not have seen that. I don't know the order. Either way, Welcome to the Moon is the newer iteration of Welcome to, which had Welcome to, then Welcome to Las Vegas, then Welcome to the Moon. Welcome to Las Vegas didn't care enough about. It was good, I just preferred Welcome to. Welcome to the Moon, on the other hand, to me has replaced Welcome to. I still own Welcome to, because it has not replaced Welcome to for my wife. My wife prefers Welcome to. I prefer Welcome to the Moon because Welcome to the Moon gives you 8 maps in the box. There are 8 separate maps in the box, all utilizing the same core concept of what Welcome to is doing. The core concept of flipping out cards that have certain effects on them, and then trying to decide where to place your numbers so you can fill out the rows, while trying to be mindful of the specific rules around how the neighborhood operates and how all the card symbols operate. In Welcome to the Moon, you get the same core engine, but across 8 different maps, all having slight tweaks and adjustments to the specific puzzle at play, which for some people might be overwhelming. You might find that there's too much variety and it's harder to remember how to play any individual map. For me, I enjoy that variety, and it's using enough of a core concept and structure that you could dive into the maps. Like, I'm pretty sure I can pick up any of the maps without having to refresh myself on the rules, because the core concept is there, the core structure is there as you dive into different maps. And you can also play it as a campaign legacy-ish mode as you unlock new cards and things as well as you go through that. Overall, Welcome to the Moon is my favorite version, my favorite iteration of the Welcome to series, and has quick become one of my favorite roll and write games. In terms of weight class of games, I'd probably recommend Welcome to as a slightly lighter version of the game, and if you're looking for a recommendation for the lighter couples or 2-player list. And this is definitely one that should not be considered to be just 2 players, by the way. I probably should have included this one too. This is definitely one that plays at a variety of player counts, all the way up to 99. I just happen to primarily play this one with my wife, and so I do think of this as a 2-player experience, one that has enough variety and rules adjustments game to game that I move it slightly to the medium weight class, even though any individual game I'd probably put in the lighter weight class. My number 6 is going to be Antike Duellum. Antike Duellum is my number 6 over here. Antike Duellum bringing you incredibly solid 2-player area control. I have Antike 2 as well, which is the larger non-2-player version of this. I prefer this as my go-to 2-player experience. Once I'm moving to a higher class, once I'm moving to 4 or 5 players or whatnot, I tend to prefer other games instead, but Antike Duellum is an incredibly solid 2-player game. The back of the box shows you nothing useful here, so I can't show you this, but it's basically an area control game. It's an area control game in which what you're doing is you're trying to manage a rondelle. This is a Matt Gertz game. Matt Gertz likes his rondelles. He's also famous for Concordia, which does not have a rondelle, but he's famous for a bunch of other games like Navigator and Imperial and Antike 2 and Antike Duellum and other games that I can't recall offhand, all of which do have rondelles, and he uses the rondelle to excellent effect in this game. You're using the rondelle to decide what you're trying to produce on, what resources you're trying to produce, whether you're trying to build out temples, whether you're trying to move around the board, to attack, to build out, you reinforce your units, to gather science, and you're trying to manage all this in a tense back and forth of area control that works incredibly well. Every time I've played Antike Duellum, I have enjoyed it, and every single time I've played it against players who know the game, there's a constant tug of war back and forth. Even as it seems like you're winning, more often than not, the other player can come back and take over from it, which is why it works well. I find 2-player area control in other genres can be victim to the idea that one player can start steamrolling the other player, one player can start winning over the other player, and there's no balance of a trio or a quadruple people, a quadruplist. No, that's the wrong word. There's no balance of having 3 or 4 players at the table to make sure that everything evens out. Instead, you simply have 2 players, which means you have to have the game balanced around those 2 players, and I find that Antike Duellum does so incredibly well. Every single game I've played of it has been enjoyable, and I've never felt steamrolled or never felt that I steamrolled another player, which is great for area control. Antike Duellum is definitely one of my favorites over here. From there, we move down to, we have 5 tiles left, which means my number 5. My number 5 is going to be 7 Wonders Duel. This is one that is always recommended. Ooh, shiny metal coins in here. I forgot about that. 7 Wonders Duel is always recommended whenever you talk about 2-player games, and for good reason. 7 Wonders Duel took 7 Wonders and then took it into a 2-player experience, and while I still prefer 7 Wonders myself, I love the drafting. I'm sorry, this has card drafting on a table. I like the actual card drafting that 7 Wonders brings to the table, but this is still a phenomenal game. A phenomenal game with 2 expansions in the box. A phenomenal game that I'm probably spilling the coins all out of their containers and compartments as I try to show you the back of the box over here. But 7 Wonders Duel is giving you a card tableau as you lay down cards and choose them, understanding fully that every card you take, you are slowly relinquishing cards to the other players. You're slowly making it so that they have access to other cards, and so there's a tense back and forth as you try to build up your civilization, try to gather the science you need, try to be mindful of the military victories you're going to engage with, all as you know full well the cards that are being unlocked for yourself and for your opponent, and trying to juggle that push and pull, that tense aspect of whatever you get is one thing, but your opponent gets something at the same time. It has the tenseness of drafting. I still just prefer drafting. But 7 Wonders Duel, phenomenal game, highly recommended. A little confrontational at times, could be mean at times, could involve crushing your opponent, taking over their stuff, and making sure they're not left with the resources they need. But if you get through all that, it's a great game underneath it. My number 4 is another back and forth called Watergate from Capstone Games. Watergate is a game that I have not stopped singing its praises since I've played this one, and I still do not stop. To me, Watergate epitomizes the systems you find in games like 1960, like Trial Struggle, games that have their own background and lineage and all that, and have their own very, very, very loyal fan bases. But for me, Watergate distills all that into a shorter, more accessible game that gives me all the highs of those games in a shorter experience. In 30 to 45 minutes, you get to play Watergate as you struggle as one player playing as Nixon, one player playing as the press as you try to uncover and nail Nixon down and the press is trying to nail Nixon down. Nixon's trying to get off. He's trying to get the general momentum of the public and their support before the press can tie him down. And so you both have your challenges as far as what you're trying to do, both achieving your own objective and stifling your opponents in this tug-of-war game as you try to play cards both for their events and for their value in order to get what you need out of the system. There's a degree of deck weeding in there. You have to be mindful of when to cash in on those good cards, when to weed your deck of bad cards as you try to figure out the best way to strive towards victory, what to push, what to pull, where to fight, where to relinquish the fight. It's a tense back and forth that I've played dozens of times now and has not come close to getting gold. Well, the box is getting gold. The box is a little ripped corner over there. Just the one ripped corner. That's okay. Games are meant to be played. I can deal with ripped corner. And that's Watergate. My number 3 is going to be Tak, another amazing game that I talk extensively about. Tak is still to date my favorite or tied for my favorite abstract. I always say tied these days because I'm always comparing it to Mythic Mischief, a game that I thoroughly love. But also, Mythic Mischief is, first of all, not eligible for this list, at least not until it actually lands. In general, I rule for these types of things is a game has to actually be in people's hands before I'm willing to include it, and Mythic Mischief is close, but not here yet, so it's not eligible just quite yet. But additionally, I think Tak has a degree of simplicity that Mythic Mischief does not. I think, push comes to shove, if I had to choose which one I would keep between Tak and Mythic Mischief, I think Tak wins. I say I think reluctantly because Mythic Mischief does so much so well, but Tak is a little bit more simpler, a little bit more elegant, and I think it's a hard choice, but I think I would choose Tak. This is not the point of the video. This is a side tangent. Point is Tak. Tak is an amazing abstract game that I thoroughly enjoy that has layers upon layers as far as how simple you can start people off versus how it continues to grow as you play, versus the board size, versus the rules you can add. Not a lot of rules, but it has a great way of being able to put on the table and within 3 minutes have somebody up and running and understanding the game and being challenged as far as what they want to do next. And as they start to get one thing, you add in another thing, and you do that 3 or 4 times until they have the full rules of the game, and suddenly it's a masterpiece of trying to figure out how to outplay and outwit your opponent in a very simple game, but a simple game with so many options, so many decision points that you have to make as you go through it. I find Tak, and it's amazing. To me, this is still amazing. This is from James Ernest and Patrick Rothfuss. It's from an author. It's from a book. This is a game that existed in a book, and I think In the Name of the Wind, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's from there, but it just existed in a book, became an actual game, and is an incredible game, which is baffling to me. Weird concepts that were made up in books should not become some of the best abstract games ever, and to me, Tak is possibly my favorite abstract game that I've ever played. Thoroughly enjoy it every single time. I'm showing you the barcode on the side of the box. That's just not pretty. Let's go ahead and turn that so you don't get the barcode view. That's much. I don't want barcodes on the box. Put them on the back of the box, where I don't show you the backs of the boxes anyways. Anyways, that's going to be Tak. My number 2 pick is going to be 2 games. Not really 2 games, although sort of 2 games. My number 2 pick is Air, Land, and Sea and Air, Land, and Sea. Or I should probably have them the right side up. Air, Land, and Sea and Air, Land, and Sea. And if you want to really be irritated, if I flip them, one of them is right side up, one of them's not, which is why I did that mistake in the first place. But let's go back to normal. We have Air, Land, and Sea, Critters at War, and we have Air, Land, and Sea, Spies, Lies, and Supplies, which, yes, is going to be getting a cartoon version at some point, at which point I will be immediately gifting this or ditching this or selling this in some way, shape, or form, and getting the cartoon version because I like the cartoon version better. It's charming and cute and colorful, and I had no problem with this version of the game until they came out with this version. But basically, Air, Land, and Sea is a 2-player game of 18 cards of trying to figure out how to play and outplay your opponent, knowing full well that at any point there's 12 to 13 cards in play, and you have to figure out how to maneuver around that knowledge of what could be in existence as you try to figure out how to bluff your opponent, how to play towards the victory, how to make your opponent think that you will win, because that whole aspect, the bluffing and folding, is a part of the game. It's not just about winning, it's about knowing when you can or can't win, and when you should withdraw to minimize your losses. Spy, Lies, and Disguise is the second iteration of that, which could, in theory, be combined. In practice, well, I'm not even going to try until I actually have the same version, but Air, Land, and Sea, Spies, Lies, and Disguise, Spies, Lies, and Supplies does the same thing with new cards and manages to be just as good. If you ask me which of these I would keep, ignoring the cartoon aspect, but if you just give me the regular versions of them and ask me which ones I would keep, I don't know. They're both equally well matched. I thought for sure that I would play Spies, Lies, and Supplies and think it's good, but I'll just keep Air, Land, and Sea, and no, this is good. This is just as good as the original, and once I have the same version, I absolutely will mix and match the various theaters to see if that provides a better or less elegant experience. Either way, they both worthy of having here. They're both, again, the same basic game, just variations of them. But they're both phenomenal games, and they're some of my favorite 2-player, well, I guess clearly, evidently, by the fact that they're number 2 on this list. These are both amongst my favorite 2-player, head-to-head, medium-weight games. Very simple in terms of the rules. Very, very simple in terms of the rules. But incredible amount of depth as far as the experience they both offer. I really enjoy and recommend both these games. Air, Land, and Sea, Critters at War, and Spies, Lies, and Disguise. Supplies, not Disguise. I always want to say, to me, Spies, Lies, and Disguise makes more sense, right? Why Supplies? I guess because Disguise is singular and it'd have to be Spies, Lies, and Disguises, which would throw everyone off, which is reasonable, honestly. Either way, that's going to be these 2 over here. And from there, and lastly, we go to my number 1 pick, which is another new addition for this year. I think the new additions we have are Land vs. Sea. These are all older. We have Radlands, which I think is newish, and what's it called? Welcome to the Moon. But the newest edition over here, or not necessarily the newest, but one of the number 1 game for me over here, which is also a new edition, is Paris. I adore Paris. That's not true. I was going to say from when I first played it, but that's not even true. My first play of Paris, I played it, I liked it, and I was like, this is good, but I don't know if it needs to be a game that I keep. And then I played it again because I was reviewing it and I wanted to get a few more plays in. And as I played it more and more, it continued to grow on me to the point that this is a 5 out of 5 for me. This game has continuously grown every single time I've played it and has not gotten weaker in the subsequent plays I've continued to play of it. I have the expansion for this game and it's fantastic. It just has more variability to the experience. Paris is a game of polyomino placement, but in 2 phases. First, you're going to build out the base of the board while also trying to snag the specific polyominoes that you want to utilize. From there, you move into phase 2, where you are both placing down the polyominoes on the board that has now been created, while also trying to take the powers. Both phases of the game give you 2 choices, and both of times, all the time, the entire game, you feel pulled between different choices that are always incredibly cutthroat, incredibly mean, incredibly compelling in the options they give you and the strategic depth of the engine, a degree of screwage that is absolutely insane, but a degree of trying to maximize your points that can be very, very rewarding. I love Paris. The expansion just gives you more abilities, more things, more stuff. I hope they do more expansions. Why? I don't know. I just want more content for this game because it is so delightful. This is likely my highest rated polyomino game. It for sure eclipses Baron Park, although very different experience for me. Baron Park's a light family game. This is, well, not a light family game. But overall, I really, really enjoy Paris. I think it's an incredible experience, one that I easily recommend, and it's so mean. It's just so mean. You have to be comfortable with mean. In fact, many of these games, I would say, are a little bit more confrontational and in your face. Anything from Watergate, which is a tug-of-war, land versus sea, which can be brutally mean, Targi, which has a lot of meanness, Antike Duellum, you're going to be getting in their faces. Dominion can be much nicer unless you start adding in the attack cards. Land and Sea don't feel mean, although they are confrontational. Radlands can be mean at times as you take over your opponents. 7 Wonders Duel has an element of meanness. Welcome to the Moon, not so much. And Super Fantasy Brawl and Attack, not so much as well. I guess Super Fantasy Brawl, you are attacking each other, but it feels more lighthearted. But Paris is brutal and cutthroat and mean. Incredibly satisfying, but brutal and cutthroat and mean. And that's my list. These are my 10 favorite medium weight, 2-player, coupley focused games. More the 2-player than the couples part, but it depends on your relationship and how you head into that. Or just no relationship at all. This is just 2-player games. Don't get too sidetracked on the couple things. That's just, it's good titles, but it's not necessary. In any case, and until next time, I hope you found this video helpful in some way. And as always, I hope you have a good one.